My name is Michael. I am an ordinary man, but my story is not ordinary. It is the story of a father's love, sacrifice, and heartbreak. I want to tell it because sometimes people forget what a parent gives up for their children and how heavy the weight of that word, father, really is. I was born in a small rural town in America. We didn't have much. Our home was old. The winters were freezing and summers were blistering hot. My father was a factory worker, and my mother cleaned houses. I grew up knowing the value of hard work and the value of faith. Every Sunday, no matter how tired we were, we went to church. We didn't have new clothes, but we had our faith in God, and we believed He would provide. As a boy, I worked alongside my father in the fields and odd jobs. I mowed lawns, delivered newspapers, and helped neighbors just to earn a few dollars. Life wasn't easy, but deep inside, I carried a dream. When I had children of my own, I would give them a better life. They would not have to go to bed hungry the way I sometimes did. They would not feel ashamed at school because their shoes were old or their clothes were torn. When I married my wife, I made a promise in my heart. My children will never face what I faced. I will work myself to the bone if I have to, but they will have a better future. When my first child was born, my son, I held him in my arms and felt like the richest man alive. He was so small, with tiny fists that curled around my finger. I whispered, "Son, you will not suffer like I did. You will study hard, you will grow strong, and one day you'll make me proud." When my daughters were born later, my heart grew even larger. People used to tell me, "Sons will carry your name, but daughters are harder to raise." But to me, that was no difference. They were all my children, my blessings, my blood. Life was hard. I worked in construction and warehouses and even did night shifts as a janitor. I never complained. Every dollar I earned, I thought of my children. I skipped meals so they could eat. I wore the same pair of boots for years so I could buy them new school shoes. When my back hurt from carrying heavy loads, I told myself, this pain is nothing compared to the joy of seeing my kids succeed. I remember the first day I took my son to school. His little hand gripped mine so tightly. He was nervous, but I knelt down and said, "Don't be afraid. Knowledge is a gift from God. Go in there and shine, son." My eyes were wet as I watched him walk inside. To me, that moment was a dream coming true. There were times we didn't have enough to pay the bills. The landlord banged on our door asking for rent. I stood there ashamed, but I always forced a smile when my kids looked at me. "Don't worry, your father will take care of everything." And I did. Somehow, I always did. When my children were sick, I stayed awake the whole night, sitting by their bedsides. I prayed with all my heart, "Lord, take away their pain and give it to me instead." Once, my daughter had a terrible fever. I carried her in my arms through the cold night, running to the hospital barefoot because the car had broken down. My feet were cut and bleeding, but I didn't care. A father doesn't stop when his child needs him. Years went by. My children grew taller, stronger, and smarter. I grew older, weaker, and more tired, but my love never faded. Every night I prayed, God bless my children. Make them good, make them kind, and make them successful. I never thought of myself. I never asked them for anything. My only dream was that one day, when they were grown, they would look at me and say, Dad, you gave us everything. Now it's time for you to rest. That was the dream that kept me alive. But life had other plans. Children grow fast. One day you are holding their hand as they take their first steps, and the next day they are taller than you, running into a world of their own. I thought as my children grew older, they would understand the sacrifices I had made for them. I thought they would see the nights I stayed awake, the meals I skipped, the back-breaking work I did just to keep food on the table. I thought they would honor that. But I was wrong. It started small, so small that I ignored it at first. When my son was a teenager, he rolled his eyes whenever I asked him to help around the house. If I told him to mow the lawn, he sighed and said, "Why don't you do it, Dad? You're the one who cares about it." His words cut deep, but I stayed silent. I told myself, he's young, he'll grow out of it. My daughters, too, began to drift. They were once my little girls who hugged me tight when I came home from work. But as they grew older, they avoided me. When I asked about their school, they gave short answers. When I tried to give them advice, they said, "Dad, you don't understand. Times are different now." Maybe they were right. Times were different. The world around them was changing fast, and I was just an old man trying to keep up. But what never changed was my love for them. One day I came home after a long shift. My back was hurting, my hands were cracked from the cold, and I could barely stand. I sat down at the table, hoping one of my children would ask me how my day was. Instead, my son looked at me with irritation and said, "Dad, why do you always come home so tired? Other kids' fathers have real jobs, jobs in offices, jobs where they wear suits. Why can't you be like them?" Those words broke me. For years, I carried bricks, loaded trucks, and worked double shift just so he could have new clothes and school supplies. And now he was ashamed of me? I wanted to tell him, "Son, every callus on my hand is for you. Every wrinkle on my face is for you. Every dollar I earned went to you." But the words stuck in my throat. I didn't want to argue with my child. I just lowered my head and whispered, "I'm doing the best I can." My daughters weren't kinder. One of them once said to me, "Dad, why can't you buy us a bigger house? My friends live in nice neighborhoods, and we live here, where nothing ever changes." She didn't see how many nights I stayed hungry just to save for their future. She didn't see how many times I refused new boots for myself so she could have new dresses. I began to notice a pattern. They weren't grateful anymore. They weren't even polite. The little things I did, fixing their bicycles, driving them to school in the old beat-up truck, giving up my own needs for theirs, meant nothing to them. They acted as if it was my duty, as if I owed them everything. One Sunday, I asked them to come with me to church. I wanted us to sit together as a family and thank God for His blessings, but my son refused, saying, "I don't have time for church. I've got better things to do." My daughters made excuses too. I ended up sitting alone in the pew, looking around at other families praying together. I bowed my head and prayed, "Lord, please guide my children. Please soften their hearts." At night, I sometimes overheard them talking to their friends. They laughed at me. My dad doesn't even know how to use a smartphone, my son said once, chuckling. My daughters complained, our dad's so old-fashioned, he doesn't understand the world. They mocked the very man who had given up everything for them. Still, I stayed patient. I told myself, they're young, they'll realize one day. But deep inside, I felt a storm brewing. The seeds of ingratitude had been planted, and I could already see them growing. As time passed, my children grew into adults. I thought maturity would bring wisdom. I thought once they faced the world, they would finally understand the meaning of sacrifice. But instead, the distance between us grew wider. The small acts of disrespect turned into open cruelty. One evening, I was sitting on the porch after work, trying to catch my breath. My son came outside and said sharply, Dad, why don't you just retire already? You're too slow, too weak. You're embarrassing yourself. I looked at him with tired eyes and said softly, Son, I work so you can live comfortably. Everything I do is for you. He shrugged. Well, maybe if you worked smarter, not harder, we wouldn't be stuck in this old house. Then he walked away, leaving me staring at the wooden floorboards of the porch. It wasn't just words anymore. They began to see me as a burden. One day I went to the bank to withdraw the little savings I had, money that I had put aside for emergencies, money that came from years of sweat and sacrifice. But when I checked my account, half of it was gone. I was shocked. Later I found out my son had taken the money using my card. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. It's not a big deal, Dad, he said casually. You don't need the money. I needed it more. Besides, isn't it all going to be mine someday anyway? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own child had stolen from me and spoke of it as if it were his right. My hands trembled, not with anger, but with sorrow. I asked, Son, do you know how many nights I went to bed hungry to save that money? You don't know how many times I walked miles to work just to keep that account alive? He rolled his eyes. Stop being so dramatic. It's just money. Just money? Those two words echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. To him, it was just money. To me, it was my life, my blood, my sacrifice. My daughters weren't any different. They wanted expensive clothes, phones, and luxuries. When I couldn't provide, they mocked me. Dad, you're useless, one of them said. Other fathers buy their daughters cars. You can't even buy us new handbags. Useless. The word stabbed me deeper than any knife could. Soon, even at family gatherings, my children began to humiliate me. Once, in front of relatives, my son laughed and said, Don't mind my dad. He's old-fashioned, doesn't know anything about the modern world. My daughters giggled, joining in the laughter. I forced a smile, hiding the tears that burned in my eyes. At home, they stopped listening to me altogether. Decisions were made without me. They treated me like a guest in my own house. Once, when I suggested something about finances, my son shouted, Stay out of it, Dad. You don't know how money works. You've never been successful. Never been successful? I wanted to scream, if I'm not successful, how did you grow up with the roof over your head? If I'm not successful, how did you go to school with shoes on your feet? If I'm not successful, how are you standing here today, alive and healthy? But I stayed silent. One evening, after a long day, I sat down at the dinner table. My daughters whispered to each other, and then one of them said loudly, "Dad, why do you even bother sitting here? You don't vlog at the table. You don't understand us." My fork slipped from my hand. I looked at their faces, the same faces I had once kissed good night, the same little girls that I had carried in my arms, and now they were pushing me away, treating me like an outsider. That night, I went to bed hungry, not because there was no food, but because my heart was too broken to eat. I began to pray more than ever. On my knees I whispered, "Lord, give me strength. Forgive my children, for they don't know what they're doing, but please open their eyes before it's too late." But things only got worse. One day, my son told me outright, "Dad, why don't you just move out? We're tired of looking after you. Go live somewhere else." Somewhere else? I had built that house with my bare hands. Every brick, every nail, every corner of it held my sweat and my love. And now, my own child wanted me gone? I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just nodded. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't in losing my money, or my house, or even my dignity. The betrayal was in losing the love I thought was eternal, the love of my own children. After my children turned against me, my house no longer felt like home. The walls that I had built with my bare hands echoed with silence. The laughter that once filled the rooms was gone. My children were still there physically, but their hearts were far from me. I would sit on the porch, rocking slowly in the old wooden chair, watching the sun go down. The town would grow quiet, and I would listen to the sound of the crickets, wondering where I had gone wrong. I gave them everything. I gave them my youth, my strength, my health. I sacrificed every dream I ever had for myself so they could chase their own. And yet, here I was, alone in the middle of my own family. They passed by me in the house as if I were invisible. Sometimes they wouldn't even look at me. When I tried to start a conversation, they answered with short words or ignored me completely. I wanted to ask them, "Do you remember the nights I carried you to bed when you fell asleep on the couch? Do you remember the times I stayed up while you were sick, wiping your forehead and whispering prayers over you? Do you remember the years I worked myself to half-death so you could have food on the table?" But I never asked. I kept those questions locked inside my chest. Every Sunday, I still went to church. I sat on the wooden pew alone, bowing my head in prayer. I whispered, "Lord, I don't understand why my children have turned their hearts away from me, but please, don't let them turn their hearts away from you. Guide them, protect them, even if they don't love me anymore." Sometimes the pastor would speak about honoring your father and mother, quoting the Bible. "Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." My eyes would fill with tears. I wondered if my children had forgotten those words, or if they had chosen to ignore them. At night, I often sat alone in my room, staring at the photographs on the wall, pictures of birthdays, Christmas mornings, family vacations. In every picture, I was smiling, my arms around my children, proud and full of joy. Now those pictures felt like ghosts of a life that no longer existed. I began to eat alone. Sometimes they ate together in the kitchen, laughing and talking, but they never asked me to join. I would heat up leftovers and sit quietly in my room, chewing slowly, the food tasteless in my mouth. Hunger wasn't the problem. Loneliness was. The pain grew heavier every day, not the kind of pain you can touch or see, but the kind that sits inside your chest, making it hard to breathe. The pain of knowing you are unloved by the very people you gave your life for. One evening, I walked past my daughter's room. I heard them laughing with their friends, telling stories, and then I heard one of them say, "My dad is so pathetic. He doesn't even know how to use a computer. He's just old and useless." I froze. I stood outside the door, my heart breaking into pieces. I didn't go in. I didn't confront them. I just turned away and walked to my room, where I sat in the dark, fighting back tears. Every night, before I slept, I prayed. I prayed for their health, for their safety, for their future. I asked God to bless them, even though they cursed me. I asked God to forgive them, even though they hurt me. And I asked God to give me strength, because I was too weak to carry this pain on my own. There were moments when I thought of leaving, of packing my bag and walking away from the house that had become a prison, but then I remembered, a father doesn't abandon his children no matter what. So I stayed. I stayed in silence. I carried my pain alone like a cross on my back, and every day I whispered to myself, "Maybe tomorrow will be different. Maybe tomorrow they will remember I am their father." But tomorrow never came. Life has a way of teaching lessons that words never can. My children thought they knew better than me. They thought the world would bow down to them, that success would come easily, that happiness was theirs for the taking. But the world is not that kind. It started with my son. He had always been ambitious, but his ambition was rooted in pride. He wanted wealth, not work. He wanted success, but without sacrifice. He left home to start a business, using the money he had taken from my savings. For a while, he bragged about how well things were going. He drove a flashy car, wore expensive clothes, and spoke with arrogance. But pride is a weak foundation. Within 2 years, his business collapsed. He had borrowed money he could not repay. Friends who once surrounded him vanished. Creditors came after him. He came back to the house one evening, his shoulders heavy, his eyes empty. For the first time, he looked smaller than I remembered. He stood in the doorway and whispered, "Dad, I'm ruined." I looked at him. My heart remembered every insult, every wound, every time he had called me useless. I could have turned him away. I could have said, "You chose this path, now live with it." But I didn't. I walked to him, placed my hand on his shoulder, and said softly, "You are still my son, and as long as I breathe, you will never be alone." He broke down in tears. The boy who once mocked me now cried like a child in my arms. My daughters, too, faced their own storms. One of them married a man who promised her the world. She thought he would give her the luxuries I never could, but within a year he abandoned her, leaving her with nothing but shattered dreams. She came back home, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked at me with shame and whispered, "Dad, I should have listened to you." I hugged her tightly and said, "There is no shame here. This is your home. I will always be here for you." The other daughter chased wealth and popularity. She thought material things would bring her happiness, but money has a way of disappearing, and friends who love you only for your wealth are not friends at all. When she had nothing left, those friends vanished too. She came back broken, whispering, "Dad, I thought I didn't need you, but I was wrong." And once again, I opened my arms. In those moments, I realized something. A father's heart doesn't hold grudges. No matter how deeply your children wound you, the love inside you never dies. It might ache, it might bleed, but it never disappears. I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I loved them. Forgiveness wasn't for their sake alone, it was for mine too. Carrying bitterness would have destroyed me, but forgiveness gave me peace. That night, as I knelt beside my bed, I prayed, "Thank you, Lord, for bringing my children back. I forgive them just as you have forgiven me many times. Help them to learn from their mistakes, and help me to love them until my last breath." For a short while, I felt joy again. My children sat with me at the table, not with laughter, but with humility. They spoke to me not with arrogance, but with regret. They finally called me Dad with love in their voices. But life is not finished with its lessons. Forgiveness can heal relationships, but it cannot erase the consequences of choices. My children had sown seeds of arrogance, selfishness, and cruelty, and though I forgave them, nature, God's justice, had its own way of responding. I had forgiven my children. My heart was lighter after years of carrying so much pain. I welcomed them back into my arms in my home. I thought maybe, just maybe, things would finally become peaceful. But peace is not always permanent. God is merciful, but He is also just. A father may forgive, but the laws of life cannot be erased. We all reap what we sow. My son, after losing his business, tried to rebuild his life. I supported him, gave him advice, even offered what little money I had left. But the truth was, he had burned too many bridges. The banks didn't trust him anymore. Employers didn't want to hire him because of his debts. Even his health began to fail. Years of stress and reckless living had taken their toll. He sat in the same chair where he once mocked me, holding his chest in pain, whispering, "Dad, I should have listened. I should have been more like you." I held his hand, tears running down my face, but I knew this was the price of arrogance. God was showing him the lessons he had ignored all his life. One of my daughters, the one who had been abandoned by her husband, tried to rebuild as well, but trust was hard for her. She carried bitterness and anger in her heart. Every relationship she entered fell apart. Her once beautiful smile was now weighed down with sorrow. She told me one night, "Dad, I thought I knew what love was. I thought I could find happiness without listening to your wisdom. Now I am alone." I hugged her as I always did, but deep inside I knew this was not my punishment for her. This was life's punishment for turning away from the people who truly loved her. My other daughter, the one who chased wealth and friends, faced a harder fate. She ended up with nothing. Her so-called friends took advantage of her, left her with debts, and then disappeared. She became ill, her body weakened from years of stress and poor choices. I visited her in the hospital, sat beside her bed, and held her hand. She looked at me with tears streaming down her cheeks and whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. I was blind. I treated you like you were nothing, but you were everything." Those words crushed me and healed me at the same time. I stroked her hair and said softly, "You are my child. I forgave you long ago." But still, she suffered. And that is when I realized something. I could forgive them, but forgiveness cannot erase the justice of God. A father can cover his children's mistakes with love, but he cannot shield them from the truth of life. Disrespect has a price. Cruelty has a price. Ungratefulness has a price. I often sat on the porch, looking at the sky, whispering, "Lord, I forgive them, but your will is stronger than mine." You are showing them that pain is the fruit of disrespect, and sorrow is the harvest of pride. In the end, my children never fully regained the lives they once dreamed of. They lived, but they lived with scars, scars that reminded them every day of the way they had treated their father. And I remained their father. I never stopped praying for them. I never stopped loving them, but I also never stopped believing that the pain they endured was not from me. It was from the hand of justice itself. The world may forget, a God never forgets. So if you are listening to my story, hear me well. Honor your parents, respect them, love them while they are still alive, because a parent's forgiveness may save your soul, but it cannot save you from the justice of life. I am Michael, a father who gave everything, forgave everything, and watched as nature delivered what I could not. My story is not of hate, but of love, a love that endures even through betrayal. But it is also a warning. Never wound the hands that raised you, never break the heart that carried you, for one day justice will find you.